Civil War actually received reparations. Can you tell a little bit of the story of Gabriel Coakley?
Gabriel Coakley, beginning in the early 1850s, started to free his family. He was already a free man and a successful businessman. He sold oysters. He was somehow able to, pull together enough money to buy his family's freedom. Washington, D.C. had a big population of free people, free black people, who also lived right next door to enslaved black people, including some families. And so his wife, his sister, their six children were all still enslaved. So he began to purchase their freedom, courageous enough. And then in 1862, Abraham Lincoln said, we can't be in the midst of the Civil War demanding freedom for enslaved people, and in Washington, D.C., there are still slaves. So he signed the Compensated Emancipation Act of 1862, which freed the enslaved people in the district, but it also paid off the enslavers, saying, hey, it's reparations for slavery. So the federal government, for the first time, paid reparations for slavery, but for white enslavers. And so I'm looking at this list, 1,000 names. The most powerful people, the founder of the Willard Hotel, the founder of Griggs Bank, the sitting secretary of the Supreme Court, a key advisor to Lincoln, all this is getting paid for their lost property. And out of nowhere, this name, Gabriel Coakley, pops up, a black man, is paid reparations. He found a loophole. Because there was still slavery in the district, he never registered his family as free people. And so technically they were still his property. And so he was
able to get reparations.
It was Gabriel Coakley, but also 5 other names of black people. A woman who purchased her husband, someone else who purchased her son when he was just a boy. And so we wrestle with this idea of what it would have meant, what could have been. And what we see through the family line of Gabriel Coakley, doctors, lawyers, deans of colleges, savvy business, someone who won the National Medal of Freedom.
Wow, it's a story of what the power of economic enfranchisement.
And that's what is full access to the fruits of America.
Gabriel Coakley, this man who mysteriously acquired his own freedom, who built up enough wealth to free his family, one by one, had made, by stroke of genius or luck, the most clever move he could have made. It was either an oversight or a cunning legal play.
There were many African Americans in the pre-Civil War era who purchased family members. But of course, purchasing your family member from the owner is one thing. To then file the legal papers to have them established as officially free in the documents is another. That was an expensive and time-consuming process. And so many African Americans who had purchased family members out of slavery didn't bother with the legal documentation. Who cares? Their living is free. They're living in our household. We're a free family. We're going to go on with about our lives.
When Coakley purchased his people's freedom, they were no longer in physical bondage, but in the eyes of the law, with slavery still legal in the district, they were, on paper, still enslaved.
And so Gabriel Coakley is entitled as a quote-unquote slave owner to compensation.
Coakley was among a small handful of black people to apply for compensation, but to be 1,000% clear, these people were not black slave owners. They were men and women who took it upon themselves to try and exploit a loophole in the system. But this was a long shot. They still had to take their case before the commission, and an entire system waited against them. We got our hands on Dorothy Provine's book, the one that lists each of the petitions filed for compensation, and it's truly breathtaking. On May 20th, 1862, with petition number 332, Gabriel Coakley took his shot. Your petitioner, Gabriel Coakley of Washington, D.C., by this his petition in writing, represents and states that he is a person loyal to the United States, who at the time of the passage of the said act of Congress held a claim to service or labor against the following named persons of African descent, of the names of Ann M. Coakley, Mary Coakley, Mary Ann Coakley, Sophia Coakley, Veronica Coakley, Genevieve Coakley, Sarah Coakley, and Gertrude Coakley. To finally lay eyes on Coakley's application and see the names of his loved ones listed like this was both inspiring and surprisingly sad. He was taking the extraordinary step to try and seek redress in this novel way, but to do so meant to play the white supremacist, dehumanizing legal game, listing the most important people in his life as if they were items you might pick up at a flea market. Here's more from his petition. Ann M. Coakley is of a brown complexion, about 5 feet 2 inches high. Mary is a bright mulatto, about 5 feet 4 inches high. Mary Ann is of a yellow complexion, is 11 years old. Sophia is of a yellow complexion, is about 9.5 years old. Veronica is of a yellow complexion, is about 7 years of age. Genevieve is of a yellow complexion, is about 5.5 years old. Sarah has also a yellow complexion, is about 3 years old. Gertrude has a yellow complexion, is about 1.5 years old. The petition describes the everyday nicks, scrapes, and bruises on their skin. Marianne has a scar produced by a fall on her chin, also one on the right wrist produced by a cut with a knife. And there are notes on their temperament, fortitude, and skills. Ann M. is an excellent nurse and chambermaid. She is a moral and well-behaved servant, stout and healthy. Mary does all my cooking, washing, and ironing together with all my housework. Moral, industrious, and temperate. Marianne is a good child's nurse. Coakley produced the receipts. The $350 he paid for his wife, Mary, and the $1 purchase of his sister, Ann Mahala, that we found in the archives last week. This was a Hail Mary, a black man, lawyered up, with fastidiously kept records, pulling up a chair to the white man's table, demanding a slice of the pie that was owed him. And guess what? Coakley got paid. Historians say the average petitioner received about $300 per slave, but with 8 people on his petition, the commission paid Gabriel Coakley $1,489.20. And for a black man in the United States, this amount would have been earth-shaking, enabled him to leave a mark, not just on his family, but on the city itself. It was just 2 years after that payment that Coakley would host the Strawberry Festival on the White House lawn for what would become St. Augustine Church. And by the 1870s, he would serve as one of the first commanders of the Knights of St. Augustine, a military-inspired mutual aid group that would care for the poor and represent the church at official events. Dressed in military regalia, Coakley was a leader and a man of influence. It seems likely that if you were black in D.C. at this time, it'd be impossible to not at least know of him. Much of this history has been lost, but not if you know where to look. In just a matter of decades, the family's fortunes had shifted from fighting to survive slavery to thriving. Their names would be sung among the upper echelon of black society in D.C. and far beyond it. The seeds that Coakley had planted were bearing fruit.
Would you like to give the background of your family?
This is from an amazing old interview from a Black Women's Oral History Project at Harvard's Radcliffe Institute. It's of Dr. Lena Edwards, who in her day was among the nation's most renowned physicians, one of the first Black women in America to be board certified as an OBGYN. Her father was a dentist and oral surgeon, and her grandfather?
My mother's father was Gabriel Coakley, who went to Mr. Lincoln after the Civil War and asked to have permission to have a lawn party to raise funds for a Catholic Church for the freedmen. We lived in Washington, D.C., with all the various castes of Black society that were there. And I grew up in what they call the elite.
What's that? You call the
Elite.
elite.